And I think safety and security are the absolute foundation of everything we do in the church. So we talked about how do you serve your mission and you're still a business. I think it's the same thing. How are you safe and secure and you show hospitality? And so those do not have to be inconsistent. And so how do you even begin to invite a guest if you haven't considered those things? Sometimes people ask me like what my job really is. I call it CWO, the Chief Worry Officer. So I'm thinking about all these things so you don't have to. Our guests are here to be in a sacred space, and I don't want them to be thinking and distracted by other things, but I want them to know that we're here and we're thinking about it every day.
Kobe Bryant used to say about himself and the way that he viewed basketball that he was playing chess while everybody else was playing checkers. And today, when it comes to church operations, I believe we're talking to someone who's playing chess and running the operations and community life for a ministry in a really best practice way. Talking about liability and safety and security and facility use. She is really got some awesome insights for us today. So today we're going to be talking with Kate Wood. She's the Director of Operations and Community Life for Resurrection. It's a large church in both Kansas and Missouri. And man, grab a pen and a pad because this is a very insightful conversation. I'm really excited for you to hear it. So thanks for joining us today. Let's get right into our conversation with Kate Wood. Well, as promised, it is my pleasure to be joined by Kate Wood. She is the Director of Operations and Community Life at Resurrection, a really large and influential UMC church there in Kansas and Missouri. Kate, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today.
Adam, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about what Resurrection does and the excellent relationship we've had with Lightwell.
Oh, thank you in advance for that. I really appreciate it. To start, kind of with a ministry of your size and scale, what does it look like to be the Director of Operations and Community Life? Can you kind of give us a day in the life?
Well, that's a great question. So I am a licensed attorney, and I say it's just like that. You pick up your phone each day, and you're not quite sure what your day is going to look like, right? You have a calendar full of things that I'd like to accomplish, and then the day actually starts. So it's pretty exciting, but maybe what I'd share with you are the things that are on my the areas of responsibility and tell you where those issues could pop up in any given day.
Sure.
So I think one of the really important places that I'd start is with security oversight. So our buildings are, at least the location where I serve, is open to the community and to the public for drop-in, for space reservations, and certainly the sacred spaces when people need to come in. So we think a lot about our doors. We think a lot about our security. We think a lot about access and badges, and that all sort of rolls up directly or indirectly to what I do. I mentioned like facility rentals. We have hundreds of groups that come in each week, whether it's small groups, large outside events, and so forth. So I think about those. But then we also have retail operations. So I oversee the bookstore, the catering, and the cafe. I kind of think of myself as an ambassador for our location, kind of like the mayor. You get out there and you see how are people feeling? What are they encountering that's good or bad? What are the issues of the day? So it's everything from picking up trash on the way into the building to hosting the whole United Methodist leadership team here in our locations.
Wow, that's a lot.
It's fun.
So I mean, the way you approach it make it sound like fun. So with that, with something so large and complex, what are some of the core kind of processes and systems that you have to hold to make sure it all goes smoothly?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned to you my background. So that is as a corporate attorney. And so and we did a lot of regulatory work. And so one of the things that guided my practice and my daily activity was that if it's not written down, it didn't actually happen. So to me, that means documenting, not to be inflexible, but so that we're all on the same page. And so Resurrection has always had great procedures, and a lot of it was already written down. But when I first came on, it was thinking about that and fine tuning everything from accepting financial gifts to child safety to conflicts of interest and getting that all on paper. And then the next step that I took, so this is talking a little bit about my prior role where I first came on as risk manager here at Resurrection, which was a new position for our organization. But really important as we began and continued to expand, both people-wise, number-wise, and location-wise. So it was about documenting, standardizing, and centralizing our policies. And then from there, it was developing procedures. So policies are fine and great, but they're kind of at a board level. But where does the rubber meet the road? And how do you help the people walk them down a path of success? And so that's where I really lived and thought, not everyone's a lawyer. Not everyone wants to read a 10 or 20-page document. So how do you distill that into the procedures and like going about doing things every day the right way? And then it goes next to training, and then you develop sort of an audit procedure. Are things going like we expected them to go? So, with the number of staff that we have, and while the numbers are large in the sense that we have 9 physical locations, an online presence, a TV presence, and several hundred staff members that are scattered across these locations, you really have to have some rules that we're all operating by. So I think that is one of the things that's really important to me. And then you start the whole cycle again. Are things working well for everybody? Do we have to modify? Do we retrain? You can't just set it and forget it. So that's a lot, I think, of what I do, bringing a business mind. It's not it's not getting out there the same way that the pastor does, but I think of the business that undergirds our mission as really important, and we all have those different gifts. So my unexciting spiritual gift is administration. So
Man, but the way you talk about it is just, it kind of, it's the next question that I was going to ask you, but it kind of answers itself just even in the countenance that you have as you're talking about it, which is you talk about these things that are highly operational, really structured. You're talking about cycles of evaluation and cadences of making sure it's going well and improvement and all that. How do you do that? Maybe this is personal and for the people that you lead. How do you do that with a ministry heart? Because the reason that people are serving in this church is because they have a calling or a desire to serve, not just a business brain. So how do you balance that maybe personally or lead that into the people that you lead?
it is a balance. So as a church, we have a mission, and that mission is to change the world to make it look more like the kingdom of God. And so if you get so tied up in the risk, you would paralyze yourself and you wouldn't do the very mission of God's work. And then on the other hand, if you go like wild and out there, you risk putting everything that you've developed from trust to financial integrity to security at risk. So it's living in a gray area. And I think part of that honestly comes over time and experience. So I'm just going to harken back again to my professional training. And as an attorney, it's more black and white. You know the answer and you drive to it. But the church and people live in the real world. So what is the risk tolerance? What's the appetite? And what I say is that I don't even need to be the decision maker. What my role requires, and if I'm doing it well, is I'm bringing forward, here's what could happen. And here are the ways we could respond. And to me, it's really incredibly important to be intentional about decision. It doesn't always have to be my first choice or the one I would recommend, but I need the decision makers to know here's where we are on this scale. You tell me what you think is acceptable. So it is an absolute balance of doing things thoughtfully so that we remain in business to serve our mission.
I absolutely love that. Okay, so with the thought in mind of continuous improvement and evaluating how things are going, do you have any examples of operational challenges you've faced and how you help push through that? Many of the people that listen to this podcast are ministry leaders themselves. You may be talking to a ministry leader who's listening today that's a part of a small but growing church.
Mhm.
And as you've seen Resurrection grow, what are some challenges you've had to face and maybe grow through or course correct
Yeah,
through?
yeah. Well, and I said a little bit ago that while we have big numbers and people and staff, the issues that we address are exactly the same as every church at every size. Like, how do you get enough volunteers? How do you safely have adults working with children? And so sometimes I like to work more on like percentages. It's not about absolute numbers, but it's like we all have this. We all need, 15% of our congregation to get behind our efforts every week to pull off what we do, from counting the money to, being an usher or greeter to welcoming in the parking lot. So again, I would say that we've seen a lot of things because of our size and the number of years we've been in business, but they are absolutely the same at every church. So I'm going to start there. So
Yeah.
some of the things that I think have been really important is, like I mentioned, we have little kiddos, right? They are sacred. They are our treasure, our resource, and our future, and we have an obligation, a very heavy and serious obligation to keep them safe and protected. And at the same time, I always say if the church is doing its business plan, that means we are inviting people in the highs and lows of life. And so we want the redemptive person to find themselves in church. And at the same time, how do we serve all of those constituencies with excellence? So you asked for a specific question. Frankly, if you represent the population, then you're going to have some number of people who have maybe a criminal past. Perhaps they are a registered offender. They have served their time and they've finished that legal process. I'll just say that. And should there be a home for them in the church? Yes, but how do you do that safely with guardrails, controls, and mitigating your risk? And so that's a place where I thought we can really do more and better. So we thought about the systems that we had in place, and we have a Microsoft suite here, and so many people operate with Microsoft, and it has a tool called Power BI. Now, Adam, as you well know, I am no technologist. I need like hand holding extraordinaire. But what I have in spades is a curiosity. I'm like, what could our systems do for us? What have we already paid for? Like, so I need to lean on people who know more. So that's huge, huge, huge is finding out who's already sitting in your pew. They may not be on staff, but you probably have somebody, and to circle back to this whole example, but you've probably got some IT specialists. You've probably got a public school teacher. You may have somebody in law enforcement. You've maybe got somebody that's an accountant, and you say, okay, it's not for all of us to be on staff, but all of us have those professional gifts as well. And how do we come together? So, knowing what I knew a little bit about Power BI as a tool, a little bit that I knew about how the government keeps public records on offenders, a little bit about how I knew we keep registration, attendance records. I thought, is there a way that we can meld this all together and be rely on systems instead of memories and opinions and just want to go to the details where I can, not taking humanity out of it, but thinking about systemized ways. So, doing that, we found a way to use these tools to pull the public records of offenders, match them against attendance data, and push out a monthly report. Then from there, we could pick up our other processes. Do we know this person? Do we have a warning in our system? Have we thought about how do we enter an agreement with them? What do we need to safely engage them? How do we connect them to a pastor? So it's not changing the humanity and the personal engagement, but it's like letting technology work for us behind the scenes. That things, at some point, all of us, it doesn't matter if you're a for profit or a nonprofit, there's never enough time or money to do all the things we wanted. So, how can we rely on technology for good? So that's an example of a challenge, like how to manage those large numbers and a way that we created a system. We've done that for other things, everything from wedding inquiries to requests for financial care assistance. But we've kind of used we kind of found a model that worked for us and thought, like, where else can we deploy that across the many, many things that kind of give us fits and headaches to keep track of?
That is fantastic. What a great innovation, like you said, around technology to take those things that might otherwise be subjective and painful to have to talk about and to bring it into a more operational and objective space to say, are we doing our best to keep our people safe? I love it. So, along those same lines, and this could be redundant. So, maybe you just say, check, we just answered that. But are there other things? Because risk management is the thing that happens that keeps claims from happening.
That's right.
And
That's
so
right.
it could be this silent way of winning that you never really know how much you're preventing from happening because you've done a good job with risk management. So are there any other ideas or innovations that you've put in place to mitigate some of those liability risks or safety concerns that, like you said, churches of every size really do have?
Well, Adam, thank you because we're in budget season, as probably a lot of people are. It is so hard to put a price tag on things that didn't happen. So if we're doing our job really, really well, to your point, you never hear about it. And so how do you get credit for those things? And sometimes it's just knowing that you're doing the right thing. Some other topics, I guess, that were challenges or things that we wanted to iron out since I've been here the last 5 years, we looked at drivers. Like, who drives vehicles that are owned or rented by the church? So you can imagine a construction ministry or a disaster relief or even moving, like maybe you collected Thanksgiving turkeys, toys, and there are things that you want to take out to either a collection site, a distribution site, and so maybe you've rented a U-Haul. Okay, who's driving the U-Haul? Like, do we know their driving record? Have they had any accidents? So we've developed processes around that as well as putting together checklists and guidelines for safe driving. So you're not going to turn your radio on. You're not going to be distracted by your phone. Pull over if you need to take a call, if you need to look at directions, if you notice something about a vehicle, like you think a tire is low, it needs an oil change. So it can be really mundane things, but I think again, it's like how much better to have it in black and white and take the emotion out of these conversations and just say like, "Hey, when you come on as a driver, like here's our expectations. These are to," and I think here's a key point. It's to keep you safe and the church safe. It's not us doing it to you. It's you wanting to say like, "Yes, I acknowledge this. I was following my training. Yes, I understood these guidelines." And that way things still happen. I mean, isn't that the very definition of an accident? It was something that was not
Right.
planned that happened. But how much better off are you if you were intentional about writing things down and communicating and sharing expectations for when the rogue person or the rogue thing happens? You're in a much better state. So we looked at that around holistically around driving. What happens when people drive their own vehicle? So that was a whole bundle of things. A bundle of things relate to access, as I mentioned a little bit in how I engage with our facilities team. Let's be intentional about what door, like right down to what door is open at what time of day and
Right.
why. And okay, you might want it open, I might not, but let's have the conversation about why we're doing it and let's know that what we're doing. Let's talk to our staff about if you're the last one out the building, what kind of checks and controls do you have in place? So those are a couple just who's got a key, who's got a badge, what does it take to do that? Who's allowed to reserve a classroom in the children's area? And if they do, again, what staircase are they permitted to use? What bathroom can they use? So these are tiny little things that don't all, it can, I think, in even a conversation, even as I'm saying this feels like a waterfall of information, like a fire hose full of stuff. These are things that you start off perhaps by addressing things that you've experienced and like, we hadn't thought of that. How could we do it better? And that just opens conversation. So I go into lots of conversations with other ministries. I am not the expert at what they do. I may not even know what they do. But again, with curiosity and questions, I go in and say, "What's your pain point? What's hard for you? If you could wave a wand and got an answer, what would that look like? What's your biggest problem?" And then I just like to talk to them and help lead them to their own conclusions and bring in like, "Hey, have you tried this? Have you looked at this system? Have you considered like read this policy?" It has nothing to do with what your particulars are, but it might give you some ideas. So part of it's reactive and then that leads you into a posture of like, "Yeah, we've covered the basics. What else could we do?"
I love it. This is such good information. On a personal note, I have made a career in insurance. The child version of me would be like, "What happened to you?" But I have been in insurance for a really long time now. I used to work for a medical malpractice company, and we would write risk management articles all the time on things like bedside manner and washing your hands. And I can remember sitting in meetings like, "Why do we keep creating materials like this? This is like 101 stuff." But when you look at where claims came from, it was like 85% came down to, are you nice? And do you have good
Mm,
hygiene in your area? The
yeah.
basics. And so as you're talking through that, it's such an interesting thing that if you can get people kind of fired up about those boring things and really get them engaged in like, are you looking at the tire pressure?
Yeah.
Are you actually making sure that these basic things are done? So many of the things that are the biggest claim pitfalls come from the basics. And I really love the way you engage that to say, okay, let's start with reactive and see what it opens up for a more proactive conversation. What else can we be thinking
Yeah,
about?
Adam, you said something else that tickled something in my brain. It's about, and it kind of relates to complaint management or intake management. I'm going to say a couple things about that. One, if people are unhappy, I don't have this data exactly right, but the sales world will tell us they'll go out and tell 10 people if they're unhappy, or they might choose to tell you. And so the natural human reaction is like to be ticked off, like, I'm doing my best I can. Like, quit complaining. However, if they are telling you, they're giving you an opportunity to fix it. And so that's awesome. And so I think we have to be really grateful for that. And we need to respond to every person's feedback as though it has value. Again, you may or may not agree, you may or may not change your approach, but they're giving you something really meaty to work with. And so the other point you said about you were tracking like the bedside manner and the hand washing. So we treat every complaint or piece of feedback or comment fully. We'll address that. But also, let's track and find out if that's an outlier or a trend. Because if one person is cranky about the temperature in a room, you're like, okay, I will work with you. I will make you happy. I will hear you, but I may not do anything. Now, if I get that same minor complaint 10 times in, doesn't matter, a week, a month, now I'm seeing a trend. And now, okay, that tells me something a little bit differently. And this doesn't have to be fancy. When I started overseeing the retail area, that was something completely foreign to me. So I didn't know what to expect. I actually asked them just to tape a piece of paper to the wall. And what I was curious about was foot traffic. How many people do you see at certain hours of the day? Like, should we stay open at these hours? Does it make sense? And so I just said, take a pencil and write every hour of the day on there and just write a tick mark for everybody who walks through the door. So when I'm talking about these things, they don't have to be Power BI. They don't have to be programmed in analytics. Analytics can be a pencil and a piece of paper. And so wherever you're starting from, just start gathering some information instead of just like dealing with every one off and like putting it away. Somebody's maybe giving you a bigger picture, a better insight.
I really like that. And you said this before in one of your answers. It's the ability to take the emotion out of it as much as you're able to so that you're making a decision that's based on as much data as possible. Even though those data-based decisions may be emotional in nature, what you're doing is you're trying to categorize things of like, okay, how are we actually measuring against that and what do we consider to be improvement in that? And I really like that. I think risk management is just a squishy notion. I think it's very hard to put your hands around risk management. And so the more that you can do little things like what you just described, pencil and paper, you can start to go, we can't predict it exactly, but here's our best estimate based on some actual
Yep.
measurables.
You can start to see things that happen in certain ministry departments. You can see things that happen at certain times of the year. You can see things that happen when the weather changes. You don't know what you're going to get until you start just taking a snapshot of those. The other thing that I just heard you say that made me think risk management is a squishy topic. And so I've had conversations with pastors and say, well, we're each zealous advocates for what we do. You've got the pastoral heart. And so you are to be engaging the person. And I take it biblically and I say, my job is kind of to protect for the 99 and your job is to chase after the one. So people might have different interpretations of that or may see that scripture very differently, but I think sometimes I am literally charged with the decision that keeps the body together, the body safely, and then it's other people's role to do that. So where we talk about it being squishy or we talk about it feeling business-like, I think that's okay too because that's the role. That is the focus that I bring to the job, but it doesn't diminish or change, not more important or less important than someone else's job. But I have my niche.
I love it. And, with operations leadership, I think a niche probably that lives under you is training staff and volunteers to do it kind of the resurrection way. I'm not sure you would use that language there, but to do it in a way that represents the ministry in a consistent manner. So, yes, while everyone has a specific heart for their area or a specific passion or way they would want to do it, your job is probably to bring some amount of standard consistency. This is how we do it here. So how do you do that? How do you train? Are there specific, sort of mentalities you're trying to impress upon your volunteers? Because that's the other thing that's unique about churches. We talk about this on the podcast a lot. You're not a for-profit business that just has employees that you can say, you're fired if you don't do it
Go
this
for it.
way. You also have people who are opting in and volunteering. So how do you bring a standard of excellence to both staff and volunteers when you train
Yeah,
them?
yeah. Well, I don't wanna come off so hardcore that, like, this is the resurrection way, my way or the highway or our way. So it's not really that. I think it starts with having, a posture of humility and entering into conversation, as I mentioned before, like, both inviting feedback, like, what are the issues, and then helping connect, like, here's why the policy is the way it is. I mean, you don't have to go into every little, paragraph and, Romanette in there, but you do want to say like, there's a reason behind this. Let me help you understand the reason behind it. So you have to have buy-in. I also think that the reality is with volunteers and staff. So this isn't maybe their traditional corporate career, and so you've got to remember your audience too. Like, what do they need to know, and how can I give it to them in a way that allows them to be successful? So I think we're gosh, this is High School Musical, but I always say we're all in this together. I mean, I people get exhausted because it's not us and me, it's not policy versus people, it's not, church versus congregant. We literally are all in this together. So we're all rowing the same direction, but let me try to communicate to you why. That doesn't mean everybody's excited and enthusiastic, from the get-go, but it is taking that policy, which is what you discuss at the board level, the executive level, and then you have the procedures that are written, but you also want to have that very human element. So at Resurrection, for example, we have even special needs adults that work in some of our retail areas. So the approach to training there is giving that person what they need to be successful. And so it's both person based, it's role based, it's department based, but that's kind of the hard work you do behind the scenes. You figure out how to engage the audience because you want them to be successful. You are not using policies as a hammer to crush people's soul. You're literally trying to raise them up and raise us all together because we all have the same goal of God's kingdom. And so we want that to work well.
Such good information. I'm really enjoying listening to you. You've got great insights. And did I hear you use the word Romanette?
Yeah. So
Is
like,
that like when you go indented twice and it's lowercase
I felt a
I?
little weird about that. Let's be
Oh,
honest,
no,
but
no.
it's
Don't feel
true.
weird. I'm gonna use that.
But
That's
you're right.
amazing. That's a Lightwell podcast first. I'm like, Romanette, let's go,
But
Kate.
right from the get-go, you found it. You knew
I
exactly what it
love it.
was. Yeah, you're getting to
Yes.
that little one in parens,
Like
and then you're do 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 do.
details
Yeah,
inside the details inside the
yeah.
details.
Did
Well
you like
said.
the
Perfect.
diagram sentences when you were in elementary school, Adam?
I wasn't a very good student at all, and so, I've had to, break some generational curses for my children so that they're good students, but no, I didn't like diagramming sentences or
All
sitting
right.
still or anything like
I
that.
thought we were gonna bond there, but that's
I'm
fine.
so sorry.
That's fine.
As adults, we can bond, but you wouldn't have liked Adam as a child for sure.
I don't know.
Okay, so let's land this thing because I want to come back to where you started. You so very graciously at the beginning said, talking a little bit about your experience with your Lightwell agent. Now, one thing
Yeah.
that we talk about on this podcast a good amount, whether or not it's Lightwell, because we don't want this to just feel like a commercial for our agencies across the country, but we talk a lot about being backed up by someone who understands the unique needs of your ministry. So for you, for all of the different things that you have to juggle as director of operations and community life, what does it mean to have an advocate, insurance agent, or advisor that helps you see things from an outsider's perspective or comes alongside you? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it means that I have somebody who's literally a phone call away, and it has become more than that. It has become a friendship. Shout out to Stephanie, my BFF. But because we were on the phone, and my dad also was in insurance. Really, that wasn't my background. It's something I did on the job. I had the interest in it, and I had, again, that curiosity to learn about it, but it wasn't my background. So I took the documents that were given to me, like, here's what someone administering our program should know, and then I took our policies, and so it was like a lot of self-education, and so I started at the baby steps, and I called our agent, our brokers, and I said, "Hey, can you help me? This is how I'm reading it." So it was everything from, do I understand the words on the page? And then that relationship grew in trust and experience, and I mentioned my dad, but I said, I get on the phone with our agents, like, somewhere between 5 and 10 times a week when I was doing this, and he's like, "That is unbelievable," because that is an unusual amount. But the phone calls I would get, Adam, you started at the beginning about what does a day in the life look like? Well, I would get a call, this is a real call, and someone said to me, "Well, what if at Vacation Bible School we got a tethered hot air balloon and we took the kids up and down it?" And I was like, "What would you think?" And I said, "Well, pause that, please, because I'm not sure you want to know what I actually think. Give me a minute." But we hadn't done that before, and I sure didn't know any other church that had put kids in a hot air balloon. But I could call Stephanie and go, "Okay, you have visibility across churches and across industries, states, kinds of events. Tell me if you've seen this or have you seen something like it? And then together we could have that collaborative conversation and figure out together, what had we seen? And then there were resources behind that. So when we needed to amend our policy to come in to compliance with some underwriting standards, I said, okay, I was connected then with the legal team. And then I could have that conversation with them and we could negotiate like, okay, what is it you're trying to solve? And then let me tell you how we operate and let's find the middle ground on what works for both people. So sometimes you hear expectations and you're like, we can't do it, but you need to have somebody you can talk about and go, let's get beneath that layer. Let's get beneath that initial reaction and dig it out and figure it out. So I never felt that I was unwelcome from my smallest question to my most nuanced legal, inquiry. There was somebody on the team. And I always felt that if the first call we didn't know the answer, they would find the answer. And very respectful of the pace at which we work and the need for answers and the need to keep opening the doors every day and the need to keep ministry happening and the need to know that we're having an event this weekend. We've got to solve it now. My mind is just racing through the many, many different things that we've experienced. Everything from a cyber, maybe not a breach, but a curiosity. Again, I've used that word several times because I don't want to make a conclusory statement. But we get indications that something's happening. We got to know right now. What do we do to mitigate that? And so that's my first call. And I honestly, that's even a law school thing is that when we did civil procedure, I absolutely can see 35 years ago or so, my professor standing up and saying, when something happens, your first call is to your insurer. And so I had that good feeling about that relationship, and I can't say enough about how that's played out. And it's not just the black and white stuff, but it's give me your opinion, give me your impression. As a friend, what would you do? Um, and even going out to dinner when they're in town. So it's really the whole gamut. It is a holistic relationship, and I'm really grateful for it.
That is wonderful, and here's what I like about that. You've just described the reality for you. So that was a descriptive answer and perfectly said. Now, let me flip a very similar question to something that's more prescriptive.
Mhm.
So for a lot of the people listening, they are ministry leaders, they've been sent this by someone, and yes, maybe they have a good relationship with their agent, but you've got this wealth of experience from a legal background to coming in as a risk manager to now being an operational leader. What are the things you would tell the younger version of you
Mhm.
to start on the right foot when it comes to engaging with an insurance advisor, Lightwell or otherwise?
Yep. Well, as I mentioned, it wasn't my background either. So this would have been something like just in the last 5 years. I thought, well, okay, what do I need to know? So during renewal time, boy, I actually think that's super fun. So if people geek out on budgeting and, they'll also geek out on the insurance renewal because it's like going to the doctor and they give you like your whole health prognosis. And I'm like, this is so cool. I want to dig in more. And so I would say that's what I did because we had multiple locations and this even with all those locations, the document was maybe 12, 20 pages long, and I went through each line item, and I literally circled if I didn't know what that thing meant, and that thing was either an address that showed a place where we had insured equipment or insured building. Maybe I didn't know, like from an organizational perspective, that we were renting storage space, down the street from our primary building. I didn't know what a certain line of insurance meant. I literally circled them all. Then I used the resources that were provided, that notebook again I told you for a leader's guide. I read that and I matched them up and I'm like, either I got it, answered my question, or I don't get it at all. And so I scheduled time and I said, let's have an hour. Can we just literally walk through the pages before we commit to renewing the policy with these expectations and these agreements? Personally, I need to know what I'm signing. And so I need you to help educate me. And so again, just with humility, I'm like, take it at a baby step. I really both the way I teach and I learn is I want to start at a kindergarten level. I'm not offended. So assume I know nothing and let's go from there. And so when you get those documents, it's like, you took your car to the shop and they told you the oil's low and the tire pressure is here and you need this fluid. You can either accept it all and just not be educated and say I'm willing to pay and do. Or I think if you're an informed consumer, an informed person who's interested in your own health, or you are in an organization and you think, I'm not just going to pay X dollars until I understand what I'm paying for. just do a little homework, do the best you can, then pick up the phone and say, here's where I need help. I just don't get it. And I also, Adam, the way I think of things, and sometimes I decide is if I had to stand in front of a judge, or if I had to answer a call from the newspaper, which I wouldn't do. I would turn to people who are professionals. I wouldn't comment. But I'm thinking in my decision making, if I had to explain, could I explain that I just paid over congregant dollars in the form of a premium without knowing what I was signing? For me, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. So how do I get myself prepared to answer confidently, truthfully, in a way that I can sleep at night? Um, I need to call my professional to help me understand better.
Yeah, that's so good. We've talked about this on this podcast before. The notion of going from just a consumer of insurance to being an empowered consumer of insurance. Like, how do you take somewhat of a driver's seat approach and let your advisor or your insurance agent come alongside you and guide you toward the best solution, but you should really be the one doing that research, asking those questions so that you're sharing a sense of expertise. Kate, you know your ministry and your operations better than anyone will. And so bringing an agent into that and saying, here's everything and being able to be empowered in consuming insurance is fantastic. Okay, so we're getting close to the end here. I've gone through basically all my prepared material, but I don't want to leave anything out. Is there anything you thought we'd be talking about today that I haven't asked about yet?
I think I'm looking on some notes that I took. Um, I think we also have covered a lot of that. I guess what I would say, and I've said before, is for churches of all sizes, I think you just lean on the number one asset that you have, and those are your people. And so we've talked about our professional resources that we use, but I'm just going to name it again. I think you need to look. I think everyone should look into their pews and figure out who's there. I bet you've got somebody who has written a grant in their life, and maybe you can get security cameras paid for by the government. But there's some hoops to jump through to do that, to get the money. But I bet somebody knows something. And so I would ask. And somebody has worked in an IT department. Like I mentioned some of those roles before. Teachers, they can absolutely inform. Like we do that quite a lot. We reach out to our early learning because they're regulated piece of our operations, as so many preschools are, and we say, "What's the government telling you?" Okay, and now we know what those expectations are. How can we apply those to our Sunday school classes? So that's an example there. Again, I mentioned law enforcement. We reach out to both people in the pews, but we also call our local PD and we in our fire department, and we say, "Hey, we're in construction right now," and we are. We're in construction for about 2 years on some really exciting things that are going on here. But we want our fire and police to not ever have to come to our building for the first time in an emergency. So we periodically say, come walk through. There's some changes happening, or maybe we've got some new staff. So I always think of what are low cost and no cost ways for people to help me be more successful. So it's finding free money, it's finding community resources that the community is paying through their taxes. If lights are out, I know who to call. If we're seeing something happening in our parking lot, again, we might call the police and just say, "Hey, can you guys add a drive through our parking lot in the evenings?" So we are not shy to lean on other resources because, again, it is a whole community endeavor. And with those limited resources, we just get creative. And so think who's out there that can help you. And it doesn't mean you're funding a new position or you're providing benefits. You're allowing people to share with you a gift of their expertise and where we both win. Okay, Adam, one more thing I was just thinking about is that so often people think about safety and security as something that they do after they finish their day job in ministry, and then they think about how will I keep my guests safe? And I just would say that I like to flip that on its head. And I think safety and security are the absolute foundation of everything we do in the church. So we talked about how do you serve your mission and you're still a business. I think it's the same thing. How are you safe and secure and you show hospitality? And so those do not have to be inconsistent. And so that's a big message I think I would have as a takeaway is it's foundational. So how do you even begin to invite a guest if you haven't considered those things? Sometimes people ask me like what my job really is. I call it CWO, the Chief Worry Officer. So I'm thinking about all these things so you don't have to. Our guests are here to be in a sacred space, and I don't want them to be thinking and distracted by other things, but I want them to know that we're here and we're thinking about it every day.
My goodness. Kate Wood, Director of Operations and Community Life and Chief Worry Officer at Resurrection, a church in Kansas and Missouri. It has been truly delightful to talk to you today. And on behalf of the people there at Resurrection, thank you so much for the way that you are using your unique professional background and your spiritual gifts to serve them. And on behalf of the Lightwell Podcast, thank you so much for your insights and the conversation today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Adam.
Wow. My thanks once again to Kate Wood, Director of Operations and Community Life at Resurrection. What an incredible person. Like, just so many good things to say, and even just the way that she shared them, you can just feel the evidence of her heart for that ministry. And I hope that that was really helpful to you today. I hope that something that was said or shared sparks something for you that you feel like you can either implement in your ministry or you know what question to ask next. And so with that in mind, if you'd like to learn more about working with a Lightwell Insurance Advisor, you can go to lightwell.com and start a conversation there. Until then, thank you so much for making this conversation a part of your day. And until the next episode of the podcast, let's go and let it shine.